for a change in the way science is explored and is created. And IUCN is doing that in many ways with the commissions and all this. But we should do much more than that.
Nigel, from the perspective of indigenous peoples, how would you see the contribution that they could make to IPBES? In what way, what format, what would it require for this indigenous knowledge to also be mainstreamed into the work of IPBES?
Thank you. I just thought maybe as a couple of opening remarks, as not everybody social scientists is, you know that there are 7,000 human languages on Earth, and of those, more than 90% are narrow niche, which means that they have evolved in specific biodiversity contexts, in specific ecosystems. So their terminology and their concepts are very, very specific to the biodiversity of the territories in which they emerge over thousands of years. And we've said that the IPBES process is the interface between science and policy. But it's a bit worrying because the science is a tiny fraction of the human knowledge system. And what we really should be talking about is the interface between knowledge and decision making, which allows us to bring in the bulk of the human knowledge about biodiversity and ecosystems. And what is typical in indigenous knowledge systems is, whereas in Western science we move towards more and more expertise about less and less the further we go along, indigenous systems work the other way around. The older you get, you have more detail on a broader base. So you have to know more species, more about ecosystems. There's also a temporal factor in indigenous knowledge systems. Just in the example of the Jutansi knowledge system that's been studied, is they seem to maintain between 150 and 200 years of climatic and environmental knowledge that gets recycled through oral storytelling systems, so that there can be a memory as the system changes over time, that they don't lose the temporal component. So I think the big challenge to us is the bulk of these 7,000 languages are not written. The bulk of these people are illiterate. The interesting part is that the weaker we are in the sciences globally, the stronger we usually are in the knowledge systems, the indigenous knowledge systems or traditional knowledge systems. So in a continent like Africa, where we worry about our science base, in fact we have an immense amount of biodiversity, and we have 1/3 of human languages on our continent. So we're clearly very rich in knowledge systems. The question is how you build a bridge between the knowledge holders and those who need to hear it. And an interesting example, we were just in Chad, we had worked with the World Meteorological Organization between the rural nomads, meteorologists, and the government of Chad around the impacts of climate change on biodiversity and ecosystems. And my big fear was that the government wouldn't be able to understand the Fulbe-speaking nomads. In fact, the government couldn't understand what the meteorologists were saying in French, but they did understand quite clearly what the nomads were saying. That part we interpreted. So sometimes the problem is around the mediation of the knowledge, rather than even speaking the same physical language. I think the big opportunity for us is that technology is moving very fast. And it allows us to move much more easily from oral knowledge systems into kinds of knowledge platforms where there is a mediation of these knowledge systems. So just a very simple example is using georeference three-dimensional modeling to create a GIS representation of indigenous knowledge systems in the first language, rather than through a translated system. It allows you to put biodiversity, ecosystem, and governance information all in a georeference three-dimensional model that illiterate people can very easily manage, handle, explain, feel confident about, and then move it into a GIS format where African decision makers can quickly work with that and consult with scientists. Another example, and again an African example, is the development of the cyber tracker information, which allows biodiversity information in spatial context to be moved into a database system, which can be uploaded into a cloud, where you can have what we would consider an illiterate tracker, but somebody with extremely sophisticated knowledge, be able to capture what he or she sees into an electronic database system that then gets georeferenced. So we're able to move from knowledge directly into data. So for a continent like Africa, which is data poor and knowledge rich, these provide us with very important opportunities. The question is whether the scientific community understands that this opportunity is ahead of us, and that we need to have a North-South cooperation to make sure that technology is available so that the countries of the South are able to release the knowledge that they have into the decision-making processes. And that's really an intercultural, interface process that is completely achievable in this day and age.
Thank you. Before I move on with the panel, I have in the room the president of ICSU, the International Council for Science. And I'm sure, having heard what you just said, he might have something to say to that. Please, Professor Lee.
Well, ICSU is an organization, it's an NGO. We have 121 national members and 30 unions working together in many programs. And actually, IPBES is an organization that ICSU supported very strongly. I think in 2009, it was with IUCN, the visitors, and ICSU productive vision. At that time, ICSU and IUCN both saw that the government were getting inconsistent scientific information from different sources of varying qualities, of different credibility and independence. Therefore, for a scientifically and politically independent, credible, relevant, and legitimate mechanism. This new mechanism provides critically needed scientific information to support decision making and action on biodiversity. So in that sense, ICSU is in complete agreement with IUCN and with all of us. We really have to move on to make contribution to I use for IPBES. Well, obviously, we share the same vision of what IPBES can become. And IUCN and ICSU can offer similar contributions, especially the research, scientific knowledge, and expertise in global network of actors, data, and other knowledge products. Well, it means that the ICSU, ICSU, and IUCN could be doing the similar things and might have some overlap. But in the sense that the IUCN runs actual product on the ground, but ICSU does not. But ICSU, on the other hand, is much more extensive, like code data, all data system, and many other things going on for the global environmental change related areas, spanning many disciplines. But what is changing in the ICSU and also with the International Social Science Council and UNESCO, UNEP, and many other organizations is the future Earth. We are seeing that things are changing very, very quickly, and human impact become larger and larger. We are entering Anthropocene. So the knowledge discovery and how knowledge could be used for the policymaker, we are setting up the new project for future Earth. And that, again, we have to work very closely with IUCN and the visitors. But as a scientist, I do want to say one thing. IPCC keep on saying that the global warming will cause lots of problems, and we talk about protecting the biodiversity and living environment and all those kinds of things. But if I ask the question, what would be the major factors to influence all these things that we are talking about? If we believe the scientific estimate and all the model, and based on the observation, I think we don't have much time left. We don't have much time left. We just mentioned it's a long, long time. We don't have much time left. According to the calculation, if we continue on the business as usual, within the next 30-40 years, temperature rise beyond 2 degrees. And extreme weather, drought, and flood is the one which will wipe us out completely. 2 years ago, in one typhoon came, stayed in Taiwan for 2 days, dropped 3 meters of rain. In that evening, the entire village was wiped away. 800 people killed, and all the forests all gone. And that's the fact that I'm worried about. It takes a long time to repair it. It takes a very short time to destroy it. So unless we wake up and say, this spaceship is overcarrying our capacity, we have to do something immediately. Otherwise, you have a vision 2050, you cannot see it. And the discussion will not be realized if the extreme weather will continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Now, let me come back to my panel. Kurt, you come from a company, Esri, and you might say a few words about what Esri is, what it does. But I know it from the point of view that I know you do some software. Okay, so how does a company like Esri, how can it be relevant for IPBES and vice versa?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the last part of your question there.
How could you be potentially a contributor and a beneficiary of IPBES, in other words?
Thank you very much again, Ms. Hamida, to Pierre for the invitation. I'd like to start by reinforcing one thing that Nigel said, and that was that you're looking at the stakeholder community for IPBES. Really span that stakeholder community beyond science and policy makers, and really include indigenous communities and indigenous people, and the broader community at large in the process of both providing information to IPBES and also getting results from IPBES that they need. Again, I'm here representing Esri. Esri is a software vendor for geographic information systems. The simplest way to put it is computer mapping. A slightly more accurate way to put it is computer mapping with all the powers of the database behind it. So it's a spatial system, but the spatial data is supported by a deep database behind it of any of the attributes that you would capture in a normal database. In terms of how we can benefit, some of the efforts of what IUCN is doing right now in their knowledge product will be a huge benefit to our customers, our stakeholders, in doing their work and saying, we now have authoritative data sources to use in our analyses to, again, reduce, eliminate impact to biodiversity. From the perspective of IPBES, we look at the importance of the standards of the standard models, the standard approaches that are used, that we would then be able to translate perhaps into specific tools, specific models that our customers can use. So it's very much an issue that, similar to IPCC, we count on IPBES to provide those standards that our customers can use with the data that IUCN provided. And therefore we have standards, we have the methodological approaches, and we have the data for those groups to produce effective decisions.
Thank you. Andreas, I have not forgotten you. Now let me move to perhaps another question, although you may be free to react also to the previous questions. And this is, if you go back to a presentation from Ibrahim, where he presented the 4 functions of IPBES, one of which was about assessment. And I'm wondering whether you have some view on what you could see as priorities, be it at the global or regional or sub-regional level, in terms of the assessments that are really needed now for those who need to take decisions and those who need to manage the resource to be able to move forward. And given the urgency that Professor Lee just mentioned, and all of us, we agree with that.
Thank you, Cynthia. What I would like to add a bit to what my previous speaker said is that for us it's very important to have really a process to create ownership by stakeholders, and in particular ownership by the governments. And this is one thing we achieved in IPCC where it led to government action, which maybe was not sufficient, but at least it really helped move the process a bit. And when it comes to precisely what assessments we need when we talk about the assessment function, I think it's important that we work in line with the strategic plan for biodiversity. So the strategic plan for biodiversity was created by the CEP, but has been adopted or acknowledged or recognized by many processes and political processes and other institutions. So I think this is really a good guideline for the work.
Does anyone else on the panel wish to comment about assessment priorities? The question I asked you. Anyone of you would like to say something on that? Claudio or James? Yeah? Please give the microphone to James.
Yes, assessments are really critical and there are quite a number of priorities in areas where you do the assessment. Particularly ecosystem valuations. There is a big gap. What is the value of these ecosystem services? This is a question that is very common, and assessment to answer this question is very critical. We also need to invest in ecosystems. That's another area where you're doing assessment for purposes of investment, whether you are doing planting of trees, planting of mangrove for purpose. If it is for business processes and for business operation, then it is very important to know what are the investments. You need to do all this assessment. Also assessment whenever you are doing projects. It's basically important when you want to do environmental impact assessment, environmental audit, strategic environmental impact assessment. These are critical. And I'm sure a combination of all the players in the IPBES will contribute to this at a global level, at national level. As we are saying, it is two-way traffic. IPBES provides information as well as the stakeholder providing this very critical information that is needed for decision making.
Let me address the audience and ask if there is anyone who would like to react to that question about the assessment or assessment of knowledge in terms of the priorities that we really think the gaps that are there, which IPBES could fill and should fill soon enough to be able to contribute to saving biodiversity and ecosystem services. Please take the microphone in the hallway and identify yourself. Thank you.
My name is Klaus Friede from the Bonn Zoological Museum, Germany. I'm not speaking part of any of the IPBES representatives from Bonn, but I'm speaking as a scientist. Does this work? Does everybody hear me? No? Yeah, because you are sitting next to me.
Oh,
No, it's not.
sorry.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Okay. So I'm speaking as a scientist, and I have the feeling from what we have heard here, especially from the talk by Stuart, that IUCN is providing a lot of the products which IPBES will produce, hopefully. We do have concise reports, such as the Global Biodiversity Outlook, the Living Planet Index, we have the Living Planet Footprint, etc. So we have easy accessible information and assessments of ecosystems and biodiversity. What is missing and what IPBES could do, from my opinion, is some sort of rating, like the rating agencies. And I've heard from Achim Steiner that environmentalists should learn from economists. So that's my first lesson. And I would suggest that IPBES could undertake some sort of rating. And the unit to be rated, of course, would be countries. How do they comply with their national biodiversity action plans? How do they comply with the challenges which have been identified by the report? How does the US reduce their carbon footprint? And how do certain forest countries manage their forest resources. And then you make a rating, and then you get double B or the C or so on, and finally you have a list of countries, how they comply with biodiversity issues. I think that would really be a good program that I as a scientist would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is Carlo Fatta. I work for Biodiversity International based in Nairobi office. I think one element and one type of assessment that is probably needed, even if it has been touched by some of the panelists, is the role that agriculture should play in helping the conservation issue. There are aspects of agriculture which are based on diversity and that mimic much better natural systems that can provide sustainability and can provide support to the conservation of biodiversity. There are issues related to the conservation of crop wild relatives that are extremely important because they possess traits for adaptation to climate change that should also be included there. There is a gap in knowledge for the crop wild relatives where